This is Euroscopic, your weekly roundup of what happened, what's happening, and what might happen in and to Europe. In partnership with EU Observer, we bring you insights and reporting from their people on the ground across the European Union and beyond, plus interviews with European policymakers and analysts. I'm William Bluecroft, a journalist who writes the Germany Substack newsletter called The Schland.
And I am Martin Gack in Berlin, author of Inconclusive Thoughts, also on Substack.
We're recording this episode on Wednesday, April 17th, 2024, and we're looking at Peepergate going back in the gate, new polling showing support for the European Parliament, a cancelled and then uncancelled far-right rally in Brussels, and we'll be looking at our main story, alleged double standards when it comes to air defense of Ukraine versus Israel. Plus, we'll have an interview with Simon van Dorp. He is an investigative journalist with the platform Follow the Money.
So, that's how it starts. Every episode starts.
That's how it always starts.
Yeah. Let's just do it again now. So
that could be our takeaway.
Yeah, take in, take out, whatever. How has your week been coming along since we're already on Wednesday? We're recording unusually late in the week. It's been a very, very busy week for both of us, right?
That is true. And plus, I've had the good fortune of catching this week whatever you had last week. So moving a bit slower, thinking a bit more slower.
I have not in any way, I'm in no way responsible for that because we haven't crossed paths. We have not really seen each other other than on screens.
Well, I'm sitting on enough trains back and forth. I think I'm spending most of my life on trains these days between the German side and the Dutch side. And this being a classic spring of constantly going back and forth between downpours and sunshine. So
I spent 2 days in Brussels where I actually witnessed a European monsoon yesterday. It was really just spectacular. I was sitting with a friend near Merode, and it was raining in a way that I don't think I have seen since my childhood in vacations in Brazil or actually movies. It really was it just looked like a flat surface of water. It was really quite spectacular, and the weather was in perfect Belgian style, absolutely miserable. I was going to say,
so you had a good time in Brussels.
I have to say, I love Brussels. I am a big fan of Brussels. I think that Brussels is incredibly underrated, although it has also become incredibly expensive. But the architecture is fantastic. The food is fantastic. The people are friendly, and when the sun shines, I mean, it's really no better place to be, I think. I mean, it was Tuesday yesterday that I was working at the European Parliament, and as I came out around 3:30 p.m., the market across the parliament in Luxembourg was still going, and the guy with the oysters was there. So for anybody that is on a Tuesday in Brussels, I strongly recommend going to the market in Luxembourg right across the street from the parliament and eating oysters. 6 oysters for 10 euros. I think it's perfectly reasonable. Plus a glass of wine. So, I mean, it was really, in a way, it's a mental vacation. It's very good. I mean, of course, that is counteracted by the fact that it was dealing mostly with European politics and a lot of, doom saying and end of days preaching kind of thing. But other than that, it's been a lovely, lovely start to the week.
Well, I'm glad. I mean, I'm glad that you have such positive things to say about Brussels, because I often feel like I'm a lone voice when I speak for the merits of Europe, the European Union's de facto capital. Because I've always had a great time there.
It just gets a lot of, I think, unfair shade. I mean, it's people think it's boring. I think it's all the contrary. I mean, it's basically very accessible and very friendly. Anyway, let's stop singing the praise of Brussels.
I don't know. Maybe we could probably get money from the Brussels tourism office if we keep this up.
This might well be a very good business idea on how to keep this podcast going. So,
but until then, you were in the thick of European affairs and European politics, and really in the belly of the beast, right? I mean, in European Parliament.
Yeah, I mean, I actually I also had a little run through the Commission building, and I kept asking sort of assistants and sub-assistants of people we were going to meet what was the mood, and
every journalist's favorite question: what's the mood?
What's the mood? And I think that what was telling about it is that I did not receive a single answer in anything that could be recognized as a language, European or otherwise. What I got were mainly guttural sounds and expulsions of air from people essentially looking down at the floor, which leads me to think that the mood was...
Are you sure you weren't at a zoo? Were you at...
Look, I mean, I don't really want to, go in that direction discussing European politics. It can get really, it can go low very quickly. But yeah, I mean, it's really quite somber, and I think that a lot of people sort of had been caught, let's not say with their pants down, but most certainly sleeping at the switch. Perhaps sleeping at the switchboard with their pants down, that I don't know, but I mean, most certainly there is a sense that events, and particularly the concern is obviously, the far right to a large degree, and people like, Manfred Weber, people like Judova, who are the people I saw, I mean, pretty much saying out loud that the concern is that there would be an attempt to dismantle the European Union, its values, and its structures from within. And to, hear journalists, I mean, I myself had been following the question of the far right emergence in Europe for the better part of 10 years. But when you start hearing people like, the chairman of the EPP, it gives you a bit of pause.
Right. So, I mean, I think that speaks very strongly to some of the stories we want to touch on today. It makes sense that the European Commission maybe is a gloomy place at the moment, given all the scandals and the so-called gates that are and are not happening. The most recent one being we just discussed it last week, the Pieper gate, Markus Pieper, friend of Ursula von der Leyen, getting a top job at the Commission. But it looks like that gate has been put back behind its gate since Markus Pieper resigned on the very first day that he took up the position, due to all the political pressure that was put on him and on Ursula von der Leyen for possibly intransparent or inappropriate hiring processes that put him there.
I think that the name Pieper might go sort of, slowly sail into oblivion. But I don't think it does so without seriously, once again, reinforcing the image of an intransparent, democratically deficient, and at that, really quite autocratic von der Leyen Commission. I mean, it was not necessarily better in the Juncker days. You remember the appointment of Selmayr, who was sort of the grey eminence running the commission, according to some, from his lowly desk. But I think that the von der Leyen Commission continues to have this problem, which just does not seem to go away. And this is clearly a complete misstep. I mean, it's one is tempted to ask, what the hell were you people thinking? But you cannot ask that because, the von der Leyen people are infamous for not giving interviews and talking to the press. She just walks in, spews out a sentence and then goes out the other door. But I think that these are issues that sort of are problematic in all sorts of ways. One of them is actually reinforcing some of the campaign talking points, precisely of the far right and of the anti-European or at least European institutions, political parties. Another sort of part of the same political story there was in in Brussels yesterday. First an attempt, and then the cancellation of a far-right event / rally / powwow. I don't know if in Europe we can use the word powwow. Are we allowed?
I'm not sure if anywhere we're allowed to use powwow anymore, but
well,
we can check on that.
Okay. I mean, I have some friends somewhere in some post-colonial studies department that can tell me if this is acceptable or not. But I don't, I think that to be frank, I mean, the entire operation was really all the big honchos of the far right in Europe, including Farage, who popped up his head again, and Orban, Suella Braverman was also there. I mean, just really the full list. They decided to convene in Brussels, and essentially the mayor of Brussels, Mr. Kier, decided that this was not going to go ahead, send the police in, stop people from coming in, and there was then something like the cancellation of the event, and then immediately rank and file of the Belgian political system came out. I mean, all the way from the center to the left to the right, saying that this was essentially illegal, that, you cannot stop people from participating in political discussions because you don't like what they say. And today, the operation was back on. Everybody was, again, giving their stump speeches, denouncing Brussels, from Brussels. So there, I mean, I think that the takeaway from this story, which is not just that Farage is still alive, but it's also that I think that there is very clear signs that the far right is really trying to build a lineup, and that lineup is not really just sort of pageant and parade through the streets of Brussels, but it's really moving towards the constitution of some sort of bloc in the aftermath of the election, if things go well for them.
Right. I mean, my question is, when you, as you said, you have this all-star lineup, it's a who's who of far-right and populist leaders across Europe, and I do wonder, do they have anything else in common besides just hating liberal European politics, that if they do get into power, I mean, some of these people are already in power, but if they do coalesce and can kind of reinforce their power, does it all kind of come crumbling, falling apart? Because what do these people don't see eye to eye on many things, and they're, one far right populist is not the same as another far right populist. I wonder how this plays out, should they ever actually, achieve that level of power, as you were saying earlier, from the inside out, that many of them are hoping for.
The first order of business for a newly constituted far right bloc, which might incidentally have sort of fairly significant amount of power even within the largest bloc, which is of right now the EPP, just the center-right, is that they would have a common enemy and a common cause. And a lot of that has to do with, for instance, shifting or pushing the needle on questions of social policy. So, for instance, abortion, gay rights or sexual minority rights. But I think that it would also have a larger impact on things like support for the war in Ukraine, I mean, support for the Ukrainian position. It would also probably shift fairly significantly, as it has already done, immigration policy. I mean, we're already seeing an immigration policy, which was just approved last week, which has all the fingerprints, all the dirty fingerprints of a very extreme far right, I mean, mostly emanating from Rome. If you look at the kind of politics that are being played out in Rome, and this is one of the stories that this week really did catch my attention and dovetails here very, very well, which is that Meloni is essentially now trying to impose anti-abortion operators. I wouldn't call them activists, but, I don't know in what official capacity they would work, but within hospitals and clinics in Italy, to sort of try to dissuade women looking for abortions from having abortions. This is coming all the way from the top of the political machine within Italy. So if these people actually constitute themselves into like sort of a serious political force, it's not that we would see necessarily them like coming together for, I mean, obviously you can think about economic differences, right, among different right-wing parties. But I think that you might end up seeing that there are ideological alignments that actually could eventually produce policy for across Europe. Just very briefly, there was this orphan by decreed thing that also happened in Italy late last year, 2023, when Meloni forced that nobody that is not a biological parent can be registered as a parent in official documents. So gay families, essentially all of a sudden lost legal legitimacy. I mean, this kind of stuff, which is essentially should be foreclosed by Article 9. I mean, I don't want to get too nitty-gritty, but Article 9, which guarantees the right of the European Charter, guarantees the right to form a family. This would be actually foreclosed. And at this point, you can still go to Strasbourg, or you can still go out into like the European machine and say, well, look, this is not consistent with European values and laws. But obviously, if there is a serious push from a serious bloc, this is something that progressively we might actually see changing.
It is amazing to me how many laws at the national level around the European Union are completely out of whack with the European protocols and treaties that they're supposed to be in line with. Whether it's Italy, also in Germany, they're discussing how to liberalize, not necessarily legalize, but liberalize abortion, which is technically still illegal in Germany. So to your point, it's quite amazing to me just how much out of step some of the individual nation states are with EU ideals, aspirations, however we want to frame it.
What other great story do you have for us?
Well, yeah, I mean, dovetailing with, I guess dovetail's our word of the day, dovetailing with, people's involvement politically, whether it's on the right, the left, the center, wherever. EU Observer does have an article out right now on the EU Observer's new website that everyone should check out, new fresh design, about the Eurobarometer, the EU barometer, a regular survey that comes out to sort of see how people are feeling about European institutions and trust in European institutions. And this last one before elections in June shows actually quite a positive feeling among many people in the European Union, specifically towards the European Parliament. So things are gloomy, we were saying, in the European Commission because of all the scandals and all the sort of inside fighting among the various commissioners who are all trying to vie for the top spot, or at least some of them are. But at the European Parliament level, at least, it looks like people are quite positive, not only about the Parliament, but also about their desire to vote. I won't get into all of the numbers and the breakdowns and all the various things that the Eurobarometer asks for that. People who are interested in more details can go to the EU Observer website and read more details. But it is interesting that not only despite, but actually because of a lot of the chaos and uncertainty and scary developments in the world, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's Israel, Gaza, Russia and China, climate change, of course, whatever it is, that's actually encouraging people to become more interested in European politics, not less.
So the last story that I have for this week is not yet happened. It's actually happening, which is that there is a special European Council meeting, which will be mainly focused on something that should put everybody to sleep immediately, which is economic competitiveness. In and of itself sounds like something that we should pay absolutely no attention to. That's the correct preposition, not proposition, preposition. It's a tough day.
Your English is really coming along, Martin. It's really improving.
Becoming poetic. That's what you mean. But so it's something that should put everybody to sleep. But on the other hand, when you actually scratch a little bit the surface, what you find beneath is that there is a ongoing, thoroughgoing, and deep concern about the loss, essentially, of a state of prosperity across the bloc. And this is keeping a lot of people up at night in Brussels, because one of the things that happens is that, of course, there is a question of competitiveness itself and the relation of Europe to China. China looms large in this discussion. Also, the fact that Europe has not been able, in any shape or form, to sort of deliver on the promises of technological development that would compete with American behemoths. But there is one bigger issue, which is the issue of prosperity and the political impact. And, it's interesting to hear high ups in the European Union say we are at the stage in which things that were unthinkable 5 years ago are now here with us, like people not being able to pay for food, not being able to pay for electricity, not being able to feed their children. So I think that, there is a way in which the bells are beginning to ring, possibly too late, but are beginning to ring in Brussels. And this is why heads of state from across the bloc are going to be hanging out in Brussels to discuss China, and also apparently there are going to be discussions about Ukraine and the relation with Turkey, which remains, of course, important, as more turmoil could mean more immigration crisis on the horizon. So coming up, we have the first episode of what I hope will become a regular segment that we do over sort of the next few months, which I would like to call the underbelly. What do you think about that? The idea is to discuss and to hear some of the people tracking corruption cases in the European Union, and to be the person that leads us, our Sherpa through this mountain of political detritus, is Simon van Dorpe from Follow the Money, who will be joining us immediately after this little musical break.
So joining us now for Euroscopic is Simon van Dorp. He's a journalist with the investigatory journalist site Follow the Money all around Europe. Simon, thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, John. Thanks for the invite.
So what are you seeing right now? We're 2 months ahead of the European elections. I bet you're quite busy right now.
Yes, we are. We always are. We've been focusing on corruption as Follow the Money ever since the Qatargate scandal. It's in our scope, but we also follow a lot of other stories about how subsidies are spent, but also matters of general policy in Brussels. But of course, the Qatargate investigation was really what woke everyone up to the dangers facing the EU political system in Brussels when it comes to corruption and bribery. Especially because it was so clear. And so basically ever since this scandal broke, the topic has not really disappeared from the attention here in Brussels. And so, yes, we're following up on how did the Parliament respond to this? How do EU institutions reform their systems? But also on the judicial, on the case, how's it evolving in Brussels? Because it's the Belgian investigators who are dealing with this, the Belgian justice system. So we're also following up on that, and some other matters of transparency and corruption which have recently come to the fore.
Could you kind of give us an update on Qatargate, what exactly it is?
Yes, sure. So it all started on the 9th of December 2022. It was during the World Cup in Qatar. And there were police raids. It's the houses of several MEPs, former MEPs, and assistants here in Brussels. The main the main face of the scandal was Eva Kaili, who was a vice president at the European Parliament. And so police found bags of cash, which her father was trying to take away from her apartment. And in her apartment, there were also hundreds of thousands of euros in cash found. And this quickly emerged to be related to a scandal of bribery of Qatar, and then later also Morocco, who were buying influence in the European Parliament, allegedly. So this is now, since then, there have been a number of proposals for reform in the European Parliament. Some measures have been taken, according to transparency advocates, not enough. But in parallel, there is also a judicial investigation which is ongoing, and of course the Belgian justice system is very slow, so that will still take a while before we see any convictions. But so that is currently all ongoing.
What other corruption stories might be bubbling under the surface that you're looking at beyond the Qatar Gate?
Yes, another very high-profile case is what has come to be known as Pfizer Gate or SMS Gate. So it's the text messages that Ursula von der Leyen exchanged with Pfizer CEO Burla when the EU was negotiating the purchase of vaccines for the COVID pandemic. And the New York Times, Ursula von der Leyen revealed in the New York Times that she was exchanging these messages with Albert Burla, after which actually one of our colleagues, Alexander Fanda, who's based in Austria, he asked to see these text messages under freedom of information laws, but was refused. And then the New York Times actually took Ursula von der Leyen and the European Commission to court to get access to these text messages. I mean, that procedure is still ongoing. But yes, this is, of course, since it involves the President of the European Commission, it's a very high-profile case. Now, the European Public Prosecutor's Office, this has recently emerged that they are also investigating Ursula von der Leyen personally. They've taken over an investigation which was ongoing in Liège here in Belgium. They were previously also already looking into the issue more generally. So that is another investigation which we will be following closely.
There seems to be sort of a consistent issue with transparency in the von der Leyen Commission, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. I think it's a culture in Brussels which has always been there of lack of transparency. Several NGOs have been insisting on increased transparency. I think as Brussels is also becoming more important, Ursula von der Leyen calls her own commission the Geopolitical Commission. But as this commission becomes more political, it is also, we find very important that goes hand in hand with increased transparency. And so, yes, I think it's become clear with the Qatar Gate scandal also that it is absolutely necessary if the EU wants to keep its credibility, that it increases that transparency. And you see a lot of pushback actually from the powers that be in Brussels against these requests. So that is currently ongoing.
So there is the ongoing saga of Hungarian corruption, how the Orban government has actually mismanaged EU funds. And this has been going on, obviously, for a very long time. And despite that, I mean, we have just seen a massive unlocking of funds for Orban again. What are stories that you might be following in that department, and what do you see at the state of play, and how do you think this is going to go?
I think what's very important there is the so-called conditionality mechanism. So the EU basically has managed to vote laws which make it possible to block funds to countries which have issues with the rule of law. So we saw procedures against Poland, against Hungary, because the EU gives a lot of money. There are cohesion funds, there are agriculture funds. We're talking about billions of euros. Of course, if you have an issue with the rule of law and very closely related to corruption, yes, the EU taxpayer cannot be sure that their money is being, you can never be sure, even in countries that have high degrees of transparency and rule of law. But in these countries where you see these very fundamental issues, you cannot be sure that this money will be well spent. So therefore, this conditionality mechanism was really important and has been approved and has been used against Hungary. Now what we're seeing is that in several political deals, the Commission is sort of or the EU more generally, is giving Viktor Orban and the Hungarian government money in exchange of lifting. Orban has a lot of vetoes against different policies. He's just basically using his veto right against all kinds of different important EU legislation, such as support for Ukraine. And so we've seen that the European Union is now, in exchange for Orban lifting his veto, still giving into so freeing that money which was previously blocked for corruption purposes. So that is a bit a dangerous development that we're following.
So it seems like these rule of law and anti-corruption mechanisms are not so effective, or could be better. How do you see things in your research and your work?
I think it was a big step forward that they approved this conditionality mechanism. I think the courts have also supported, in most cases, several cases against this conditionality mechanism, but the courts have supported the use of it. So that was an important step forward. But as I said, when things get very political, and I mean this is of course of another level, but when things get very political, these legal mechanisms tend to be used in some sort of a horse trade, which I think any transparency advocate or people who are really seriously concerned with the rule of law are very concerned how suddenly these mechanisms can be taken off the table in a political deal. So that is an area I mean, that's very problematic.
You mentioned just before about European taxpayers, and that's something that's always curious to me, because Brussels can feel so far away and these issues can feel so technical and so out of reach of people's everyday lives, unlike at the national level. Do these sort of scandals and issues seem to have an impact on average European citizens, average European voters? And if not, what are the implications of that?
Yes, I think I am personally, of course, we're a bit biased. We're constantly on top of this, but I am convinced that these things trickle down to the general population. If people hear about Qatargate, and many people have heard about this, the danger is, of course, that the entire EU as such is being considered as corrupt, and that is, of course, it is already far from the average citizen, the European level, as you just said, and if then the people have the impression, oh, they're all corrupt, that is not good for Brussels in general.
So what stories do you think we should be keeping an eye on looking ahead? I mean, not just as obviously specialists and journalists following the tracks of European policy and shenanigans, but for the general public, I mean, what things ahead are important, you think, and should be paid attention to?
Well, a story that recently got a lot of attention was the Pipergate story. And I think that's important as well, more generally, because so Markus Pieper was an EPP, so from the largest European party, the European People's Party. He was a politician. He was in the European Parliament for decades. And he now got offered a job. He was appointed by the European Commission to become the SME envoy, and that was a very well-paid job, close to 20,000 euros per month. And it emerged in recent weeks that this appointment was political, or at least that is the allegation, that Pieper was not the most, when it comes to the merit, he was not the best candidate, but he was appointed because of his political affiliation. As Ursula von der Leyen, he is from the German CDU party. So that is a perception of Brussels. And I mean, I have to say, I spoke to some people about this in the last days, and it is truly a system of political appointments with the EPP, so the two largest parties claiming many of the important positions. And I think this issue of political appointments is becoming very important. Also, when you have the far right, which is now scoring very well in elections all over Europe, if they get an increasing representation at the European Parliament, you will also see that they will make claims to certain jobs, to certain positions. And the question is sort of, will the public administration still be able to do its job independently, or will there be a lot of political pressure? But we're seeing it in Belgium, for instance, in Flanders, where I'm from, that you have the far right party, which has a big representation in the national parliament, and they then start to have people appointed, for instance, in the public broadcaster, in the board of different cultural organizations. And so yes, this issue of political appointments will be an area that will remain under scrutiny in the next few years.
So, okay, Simon, thank you very much. Simon van Dorpen from Follow the Money, coming to us to help us go through the really quite well-stocked library of corruption cases, which are becoming every day better known and more known in the European political environment.
So our main story we want to look at today is accusations, I would say pretty fair accusations, coming from Ukraine about double standards when it comes to defending Ukraine versus defending other allies like Israel, when Iran, with lots of warning, sent several hundred projectiles of various kinds towards Israeli airspace, and they were almost all shot down, intercepted by a coalition of the willing, you might say. Americans, British, French, Jordanians, the Israelis themselves, of course, with some help from other Arab states. It was quite an impressive feat of diplomacy, as well as a feat of the military-industrial complex. And there's a pretty, like I said, pretty fair question from Ukraine saying, well, why can't you do that for us? Because we've been asking for missile defense, which is probably the most important thing for Ukraine to defend itself against Russian attacks, given the way that Russia is able to attack Ukraine.
So the criticism that came immediately after and the days after, and it came directly from Zelenskyy, was that there was indeed a double standard, that when it came to Israel, Americans were willing to actually immediately sort of find a way to defend the population, the infrastructure, and obviously the country at large. And this is not something that, even after all the promises over the last couple of years, was actually in the cards at all for Ukraine.
Of course, I think one big difference is that Ukraine is just, by sheer size, a far bigger territory to cover than Israel is. I would think that even the U.S. would have much more difficulty countering barrages of Russian missiles and airplanes, etc., than what Iran was able to launch at Israel, and especially, and of course, then you add the politics on top of that. The politics of confronting Iran and the risks of confronting Iran are much different than the risks and the politics of confronting directly Russia. This was the discussion about the no-fly zone shortly after Russia's first invaded Ukraine in 2022. That Ukraine was calling for a no-fly zone, a NATO no-fly zone, and it was quickly pointed out that even if you put aside the politics and you put aside the risks of putting NATO assets directly up against Russian assets, it would also be a massive operation that actually the U.S. and its allies can't actually sustain for very long, given the territory, the size that we're talking about of Ukraine. So I think there are some differences that are worth noting.
I mean, I think it's quite clear that not only Americans possibly would not be able to sustain it for a long period of time, but I mean, it would actually amount to a very serious strategic shift. Right. I mean, at that point, you would have essentially American and ally forces directly engaging Russia. I mean, they would not necessarily be attacking. It would be also a defensive sort of position, much like the U.S., to the best of our knowledge, has not attacked Iran. And in fact, they have even said to the Israelis that they would not participate in a retaliation operation. But it would basically bring let's say, the NATO forces a few inches closer to the open confrontation with Russia. I think that while it is clear that the question of, territorial extension is true, it is also true that what the Ukrainians have been demanding is essentially the protection of infrastructure, sensitive sites, and civilian population. I mean, we have seen over the last couple of days, double tap attacks in which the Russians drop a missile, wait for, the rescue operation to be underway, and then they attack again exactly in the same spot, killing first responders and people that are trying to help. We have also seen sort of electricity generators attack. We have seen city blocks, or city civilian dwellings attack. So I think that for Ukraine, it has become much more pressing. I think that this also is a very, very pressing question in European capitals, because the fact is that the fate of Ukraine remains essentially harbinger for whatever is that might happen to Europe in the aftermath, right? So, you do have a serious question as to, whether Ukraine not only can defend itself, but whether we are not right at the gates of the final battle in which Ukraine is, if not completely lost, most certainly defeated militarily.
Yeah, things do look extremely dire, and it's the sense I get is the support for Ukraine is becoming more and more lip service. It's becoming more and more an open secret that Western leaders are really not serious, that they are completely fatigued by this. And even, it's not just the Germans who had, have a historic close relationship economically with Russia, but others just kind of wanted to go away. But what's amazing to me is that, as you've noted, Ukraine, the security implications for Europe and the European Union are so much graver if Ukraine loses to Russia in whatever way losing looks like, than what's happening in the Middle East further away. And yet still the commitment to Israeli defense is just so much more ingrained in the psyche of Western politics than a country like Ukraine, despite the real clear and present danger that Russian aggression poses, obviously to Ukraine, but then beyond that, to European countries beyond that.
Yeah, it's really quite difficult to read the tea leaves, because there's a question that we have asked many of our guests: what would military victory look like for Ukraine? Nobody seems to be able to say what that is. There is an obvious answer to this, which is, okay, well, you take back the entire eastern band, you push essentially the Russians back to the pre-war border, you neutralize their capacity to actually go into Moldova or any sort of NATO border country, and you take back, of course, Crimea. I am of the impression that Crimea would be the biggest prize for sort of a full victory of Ukraine. The thing that nobody really can tell you either is exactly what would a defeat for Ukraine would look like. And then I think that there is one further problem, which is that nobody can tell you what a settled sort of end to the war would look like either. So what you have is this sort of ongoing flotation, trading water, around, volleys of missiles coming from Russia, counterattacks deep into Russian territory, which kill a couple of people here and there or destroy some facility here or there. But we are in, the problem I think is that we are in a war of attrition, which has as its margins, the possibility of entire regional conflicts. So Ukraine can sort of remain in this dormant, strange state for the next 5 years, or tomorrow morning it could just blow up into Poland or blow up into Moldova, or it could actually, blow up into Kiev being flattened or something like that. And I think that the impression that you get from listening to capitals, Brussels, but most certainly Berlin, where I think that the political defeat, the political ineptitude is just absolutely impossible to actually get a full grasp of, is that they are just sleepwalking through this process. It's not even a matter of lack of, it's not a matter of lack of of clear commitment. It's even an absolute lack of vision. I mean, just a
lack of leadership, a total lack of leadership.
Right. Which is normally
something
everything that Europe is known for, right? I mean,
this is
they get on the stage, they shake their arms, they like shout to the wind, and in the end, just nothing happens.
Yeah, this is something that political scientists have been pointing out for a long time, and it affects the United States as well. Just an ossification of politics and a lack of leadership, regardless of where one comes down on political views or policy stances. Just no vision, no leadership about what the future looks like or could look like. Kind of leading from behind, what Angela Merkel made famous for doing. And I think what happened the few days ago with Iran launching its whatever you want to call it, retaliation to Israel's alleged most likely attack on its embassy in Damascus, is once again Europe as a whole, as the European Union, doesn't really have a security response, right? The Americans were involved in this, the British were involved in this, the French were involved with this. The European Union, of course, it doesn't have, there's no such thing as a European military, but there was no, as far as I can tell, no European coordination to respond either militarily or diplomatically to Iran's action.
I mean, I think that I will one-up you there, that expression, I suppose, which is...
Go with it.
Remarkable to me, I mean, absolutely remarkable to me that anybody has the nerve to suggest that this obviously starts with the Iranian attack. And I think it's not really just a matter of protecting Israel from itself. I mean, the Israelis attack, the territory, sovereign territory in an embassy in a third country. But I think that what it actually goes to show is that Europeans and Americans, first and foremost, but most certainly Europeans, are now being forced to pay the price of not having made any effort to rein in the Israelis. The Israelis were giving a blank check to do whatever the hell they wanted, including including kill thousands of people and like carpet bombing Gaza and so on and so forth, but attacking third countries like Lebanon, like Syria, and now Iran in the Syrian capital, like the Iranian embassy in the Syrian capital. And I think that anybody, Cameron was asked about what would the UK do, I think it was the BBC, what would the UK do if a foreign country were to attack one of its embassies and flatten it and kill a bunch of its operatives, whatever it is, diplomats or like military attachés or whatever it is. And Cameron said, well, we would obviously take action. It's like, well, why, the UK yes and Iran no? Anybody understands, even for Iran. Iran was even, I would say, forced to take action because it has an internal market, political market, to which it still has to show that it has muscle.
Right. Otherwise, if the emperor has no clothes, then all those people in Iran that don't like the Iranian regime might get even more restive. So I think there's a lot of pieces to play here.
When you look at that dynamic, the fact that Europeans and Americans, so at the center stage, Europeans did not make any effort to rein in the Israelis, actually makes them essentially victims of their own ineptitude, of not being.
But of course now they are, and of course now they and everyone else is saying maximum restraint to Israel. Don't respond, or if you respond as Benjamin Netanyahu said cleverly. A clever response, whatever that's supposed to mean. I guess somebody's car headrest is going to explode at some point on some back street in Tehran. So if that wasn't enough, let's look ahead to what's developing now and going into the next week. Martin, what do you have for us?
Well, what's on my radar is a very strange inversion of economic scales around Europe, which you might have seen floating around the internet, which is indicators show now that while Italy is undergoing an economic boom of sorts under the offices of Meloni, Northern Europe, and particularly Germany, has not only become the old man of the block, but seems to actually be going through a little bit of economic paralysis, so to say. And obviously, this continues to develop, and it becomes sort of more important of an issue as there are also economic policy discussions on the table. I think that as we begin to see sort of the campaign rolling on for the June elections, what we're going to see is that the kind of populist right-wing economic policy that Meloni brings onto the table, I think that those histories of success are going to start to pop up in the political sphere, by and large, in political discourse. The fact that Germany, with its sort of austerity projects all the way since Schäuble, all the way since the beginning of the Merkel project, has now resulted in a fairly major economic contraction, is something that I believe voters across the bloc will take notice.
All right. I mean, I think that's probably does it enough for this week. Of course, Ukraine and Israel are going to be bubbling on, and European reactions to that. So we'll be definitely keeping a close eye as things go up, and unfortunately probably down in those directions in the week and weeks to come.
That's it for this week's Euroscopic, written by us, produced by us, and edited by Martin. You can catch us every week either at our Substack, euroscopic.substack.com, or on euobserver.com. We'd love to hear from you, so be sure to subscribe and share your thoughts.